On a rural road in Decatur County, Georgia, a pickup truck came to rest upside down, sitting on its own roof. It was a Ford F-250 Super Duty, the kind of heavy, trusted truck a person buys precisely because it feels like it will protect them. Inside were Herman and Debra Mills, a married couple, he in his 70s and she in her 60s, the kind of couple who had driven trucks like this one their whole lives. The truck rolled, and when it rolled, the roof did not hold. It came down into the space where their heads were. Debra died there on the road. It took the people who came to help 26 minutes to cut Herman out of what was left of the cab, and he died a little later in a hospital in Florida. This is the story of a roof. More exactly, it is the story of a number, a very small number, that a very large company looked at and decided it would rather not spend, because the roof that came down on the Mills couple was not a freak event, and it was not a surprise to the company that built it. It was a known weakness in millions of trucks. The fix was cheap, and the decision that was made instead of the fix is the whole post-mortem. Start with the truck. From 1999 through 2016, Ford built and sold its Super Duty line, the F-250s and the F-350s, in enormous numbers. These are the trucks of farms and job sites and long rural drives, and they are tall and heavy, which means that when one of them loses control, it is more likely than a low car to tip and roll. That much is not a defect. It is physics. The job of the roof in a rollover is simple and absolute. It has to hold up the weight of the truck so that the space around the people inside stays a space and does not clench shut like a fist. On these trucks, in crash after crash, the roof did not do that job. It folded and it came down. The engineering here is not complicated. A roof can be built strong enough to survive a rollover. Engineers have known how to do it for decades. It is a matter of the pillars that hold the roof up and the steel inside them and the way the whole cage is designed to take a load from above. On these trucks, the cost of building the roof to that stronger standard, the reinforcement that would have kept the space around a person intact, came out, by the estimates argued in court, to something on the order of $100 a truck. $100 standing between a rollover and a person's skull. That is the number at the center of this story, and you should hold on to it, because there is another number coming. Ford did not spend the $100, and this is where the story stops being about engineering and becomes about a decision. When people were hurt and killed in these rollovers, and their families went to court, the company did not treat each death as a signal that something was wrong with the truck. It treated each death as a case to be won. It fought the lawsuits, and where it could not win, it settled, and it made those settlements secret. A sealed settlement is a quiet, efficient thing. It pays the family, and in exchange it seals the documents and buys their silence, so that the next family, and the family after that, walks into a courtroom or a dealership with no way of knowing that the very same roof had come down on someone before them. That is how a pattern is kept from ever looking like a pattern. Each crushed cab appeared to the outside world as a single, unrelated tragedy, one family's terrible luck, because the company had paid over and over to keep it looking exactly that way. Think about what that choice actually is. It is not a mistake, and it is not an oversight, and it is not a part that slipped through. It is a calculation. Someone, or some group of someone's in a room, weighed the cost of reinforcing the roofs on millions of trucks against the cost of defending and quietly paying off the deaths as they arrived, one at a time, and concluded that the second number was the smaller one. The people who died in those trucks were not an accident of that calculation. They were an input to it. The trucks kept selling, the roofs kept folding, and on paper the math kept working. On paper for years, nothing in that math changed. Then, one at a time, the seals began to break. In 2022, a jury in Georgia heard the case of Voncile and Melvin Hill, an older couple killed 8 years earlier when their Super Duty rolled and the roof came down on them. That jury did not only award the family what they had lost. It looked at what the company had known and how long it had known it, and what it had chosen to do with that knowledge, and it returned $1.7 billion in punitive damages. That is the figure a jury reaches for when it decides that what happened was not carelessness but a choice. And then, in 2025, came the case of Herman and Debra Mills, the couple from the rural road in Decatur County. A federal jury in Georgia heard the same kind of evidence about the same kind of roof and returned $2.5 billion, the largest verdict in the history of the state. Two juries, a few years apart, looked at the same roof and the same decision, and each of them reached for the biggest number it had. $2.5 billion is a figure so large it stops meaning anything, so set it back against the other one. $100 a truck. The distance between those two numbers is the distance between fixing the roof and burying the people it fell on, and the company traveled that entire distance deliberately, one sealed settlement at a time. Every dollar of those verdicts is the price of a decision that $100 times a few million trucks was simply more than the company was willing to spend on the heads of the people who bought them. The seals broke the way these things usually break, through the patient work of lawyers who had handled more than one of these cases and had started to notice the shape of them. In the discovery phase of a lawsuit, the side bringing the case can force a company to hand over its own internal documents. And once one set of those files was pried loose and entered into open court, the pattern that the settlements had kept hidden was suddenly there for anyone to see. The crash tests the company had run, the engineers who had flagged the roofs, the internal weighing of the cost of a fix against the cost of the claims. What had looked from outside like a run of unrelated bad luck turned out to be a single documented decision that stretched back decades, and once a jury could see the decision instead of only the wreck, the size of the verdicts stopped being a surprise. You do not hand down $2.5 billion for an accident. You hand it down for a choice a company made about you before you ever turned the key. You would think a company made to pay billions for a decision like that would have learned something permanent about the cost of shipping a defect it already knew about. Which brings us to the present, and to the strange, almost unbelievable thing that Ford has become. Because in 2025, Ford recalled more vehicles than it ever had in its history, around 13 million of them, across 153 separate campaigns. That is more recalls than any other car maker on Earth by a wide margin. And 2026 has been running worse, with Ford issuing recalls at roughly 3 times the rate of the next worst company, more than its 3 largest rivals combined. Its own chief executive, Jim Farley, has a phrase for these. He calls them self-inflicted wounds. The defects themselves sound like a company that has lost the thread of how to build a car. Trucks whose transmissions can slip out of park and roll away on their own, empty, with no one at the wheel. Engines that stall in moving traffic. A cruise control switch that can short and start a fire in the engine bay of a parked car in a garage. A recall of 500,000 large SUVs because the shiny trim on the dashboard was peeling up into edges sharp enough to cut the hand of the person who reached for it. Each one on its own is small. Taken together, they describe an organization where the thing that keeps failing is not any single part. It is the discipline that is supposed to catch the part before it ever reaches a driveway. So here is the postmortem, and it is not really about roofs or transmissions or a strip of sharp trim. It is about what a company puts first when it thinks no one is watching closely enough to add it all up. The roof failures were a company that had decided, on paper, that a human life could be made cheaper than a recall, and that had organized itself through the courts and the sealed files to keep that decision out of sight. The flood of recalls is the same company, years later, still shipping the defect first and paying for it after, except now the failures are so many and so public that they can no longer be sealed. The verdict and the recall history are two readings off the same instrument. Both of them say that somewhere inside a very large machine, the arithmetic that decides what gets fixed and what gets shipped has been pointing the wrong way for a very long time, and the people who paid for it were sitting in the driver's seat, hands at 10 and 2, trusting the truck to do the one thing a truck is supposed to do, which is keep them alive. The fix, at the start, cost about $100, and the paper chose the settlements over the fix again and again for 17 years. But the postmortem writes itself. The only question is whether anyone reads it before the next one.